The financial aid forms didn't even make it to the desk. My father crumpled them into a ball before I could finish my sentence, tossing them into the trash can with the casual flick of a wrist usually reserved for junk mail. He didn't look angry. He looked bored. He leaned back in his leather chair, the leather creaking in the silence of his home office, and delivered the sentence that would define the rest of my life. "You are dead capital, Fiona." He said it calmly like he was reading a quarterly report. "An asset with no yield." I just looked at him. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just watched as he pulled a checkbook from his drawer, uncapped his fountain pen and signed a check for $5,000. Not for my tuition. For a security deposit on a luxury apartment for my twin sister, Bianca. "She needs a proper environment to thrive," he added, sliding the check across the mahogany desk toward an empty chair, as if my presence didn't even warrant a direct handoff. "You on the other hand are a write-off. Figure it out yourself." Before I tell you how a bad investment became his worst nightmare, drop a comment below. Where are you watching from, and have you ever been underestimated by your own family? I didn't slam the door. Slams are for people who want attention, for people who still hope that a loud noise might wake someone up. I closed the heavy oak door with a click so soft it sounded like an intake of breath. I didn't look back at my father. I didn't look at the check he had just signed for Bianca. I walked straight up the stairs to my bedroom, the room that had always been the smallest in the house, the room that felt less like a sanctuary and more like a storage unit for a spare child. Most people in my position would have packed a suitcase. They would have grabbed clothes, photos, maybe a childhood teddy bear, artifacts of a life they were leaving behind. I didn't touch my clothes. I went straight to the vent under my desk. I pulled it loose and slid out the waterproof, fireproof box I had taped to the ductwork 3 years ago. Inside wasn't a diary. It was 2 high-capacity external hard drives and an encrypted laptop that my father didn't know existed. You see, Robert thought he was evicting a 22-year-old student with no resources and a useless degree. He thought he was cutting off a dependent. He forgot that for the last 4 years, while Bianca was learning how to pose for Instagram, I was learning how to dismantle corporate veils. My name is Fiona, and I am not just a college graduate. I am a certified forensic financial analyst. I don't read books. I read the white space between numbers where men like my father hide their sins. I sat on the floor, the carpet rough against my legs, and flipped open the laptop. I didn't cry. Crying blurs your vision, and I needed to see everything clearly. I connected to the house network one last time. My father's home office server was protected by a firewall that cost more than my entire 4-year tuition would have. It was supposed to be impenetrable. But arrogance always leaves a backdoor. He used the same password for his secure server that he used for his country club login. One keystroke and the screen flashed from red to green. I wasn't looking for tuition money anymore. That was small thinking. That was the mindset of a beggar. I was looking for leverage. I initiated a mirror copy of his entire financial history. Every tax filing, every offshore transfer, every consulting fee that didn't match a project invoice. The progress bar on my screen crawled forward. 10%, 20%. It was the only heartbeat I could feel. Downstairs, I heard the clink of champagne glasses. They were toasting. Celebrating Bianca's new apartment. Celebrating the shedding of the dead weight. They were laughing. I let them laugh. Laughter is distracting. It makes you sloppy. While they toasted to their freedom, I was downloading the chains that would eventually bind them. The download finished with a silent blink. I disconnected the drive, slipped it into my backpack and stood up. I left the clothes in the closet. I left the bed unmade. I left the photos on the wall. I took only the data. Walking down the stairs, I felt a strange, cold lightness in my chest. It wasn't happiness, but it was power. My father had called me dead capital. He was about to find out that dead capital doesn't just sit there. It haunts. I walked out the front door, past the luxury cars in the driveway, and stepped into the cool night air. I didn't have a plan for where I would sleep, but I had his entire digital life in my backpack. The war hadn't started when he threw those papers in the trash. Started the moment I walked out that door. To understand why I didn't hesitate to steal my father's digital life, you have to understand that this wasn't just about tuition. Tuition was just the final invoice in a lifetime of bad accounting. The real deficit started 6 months ago in the driveway of the house I had just walked out of. It was a Tuesday morning. I was heading to my shift at the library, walking down the long, paved driveway because my father refused to let me park my rusted 10-year-old sedan next to his BMW. But that morning the driveway was blocked. A brand new pearl-white Porsche Macan sat gleaming in the sun, a red ribbon stretching across the hood like a wound. Bianca was already inside it, adjusting the rearview mirror, checking her angles for a selfie. She didn't look like a student heading to class. She looked like an influencer heading to a sponsorship deal. My father stood by the driver's side door, beaming with a pride I had never seen directed at me. He looked at that car the way an artist looks at a masterpiece. I stopped. I knew what that car cost. I knew what our family finances supposedly looked like, stretched thin, or so he always claimed when I asked for money for textbooks. Where did the money come from, Dad? I asked. I didn't shout. I just asked. He turned to me, his smile not fading, just shifting into something patronizing. It came from the estate account. Your grandmother's trust. The air left my lungs. Grandma had left that money for education. For both of us. It was supposed to be the safety net that kept us from drowning. He had liquidated it for a luxury SUV. That was for college, I said, my voice trembling. That was for our future. He laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. You need to learn the difference between an expense and an investment, Fiona. Bianca is an investment. He's going to be out there meeting people, making connections. She is the face of this family. She is a marketing asset. He looked me up and down, taking in my thrift store coat and scuffed boots. You are back in support. You are a depreciating liability. We don't paint the warehouse, Fiona. We paint the billboard. That was the moment. That was the core of my indoctrination. He didn't see us as children. He saw us as commodities. Bianca was the shiny product on the shelf, polished and displayed to attract wealth and status. I was the inventory gathering dust in the back, costing him money to store, offering no return on investment. I stood there in the driveway watching Bianca rev the engine. She didn't even look at me. She just laughed, waved at Dad, and peeled out of the driveway, the tires screeching against the asphalt. My father watched her go, satisfied. He turned back to the house without a word to me, leaving me to walk the 2 miles to the bus stop in the rain. He thought he was teaching me my place. He thought he was explaining why I deserved nothing. But standing at the bus stop that day watching the rain drip off the shelter roof, I realized something he missed. If I was the warehouse, if I was the back-end support, then I was also the one who knew where the bodies were buried. You don't mistreat the actuary, Dad. You don't insult the person who counts the beans when you're skimming off the top. Back in the present, the night air was biting. I adjusted the backpack on my shoulders. It was heavy with the weight of his secrets. He had spent years treating me like a liability, like a line item to be minimized. He forgot that liabilities can become debts. And debts eventually come due. I walked to the curb and hailed a taxi. I wasn't going to a bus stop tonight. I had work to do. The invitation wasn't a request. It was a summons. Family dinner. 7 p.m. Don't be late if you want your personal effects. I arrived at 6:59. The dining room was staged like a theater set. Crystal glasses, silver cutlery, and a centerpiece of white lilies that smelled like a funeral. My mother, Susan, was already seated, nervously arranging her napkin. Bianca was there too, phone propped up against a water glass, the red live dot pulsing on her screen. She wasn't just eating dinner, she was broadcasting it. Look who decided to join the real world. Bianca chirped to her followers, angling the camera to catch my entrance. The exile returns. My father sat at the head of the table. He didn't stand. He gestured to the plate in front of me, a meager portion of dried chicken and steamed vegetables, noticeably smaller than everyone else's. He said, "We're doing this for you, Fiona. Someday you'll thank us for the tough love. Cutting you off is the only way to build your character. It's a favor, really," my mother added, pouring herself a generous glass of wine. "We're teaching you resilience. Bianca needs our support because she has a public image to maintain. Well, you need to learn how to survive in the shadows." I picked up my fork, my face impassive. "Thank you for the lesson," I said. My voice was flat, devoid of the gratitude they wanted or the anger they expected. Bianca giggled, checking her view count. "She's so ungrateful, guys. Can you believe it?" Robert cleared his throat. He reached under the table and produced a thick manila envelope. He slid it across the tablecloth, stopping it just short of my plate. "Since you're officially independent," he said, his tone casual, "we need to clean up some administrative loose ends. Your grandmother opened a small custodial account for you when you were born. A few $100s. I need to close it out to stop the maintenance fees. Sign the waiver transferring the balance to the family trust, and we'll call it even for your room and board." A custodial account. Yiddy. I opened the folder. It wasn't a few $100s. I knew from my silent audit that the balance was over $400,000. Money he had been funneling there for years to hide it from the IRS, disguising it as gifts to his child. He thought I wouldn't read it. He thought I would just sign to get out of there. I picked up the pen. I scanned the document. It was a standard release of custodianship. But my father, in his arrogance, had made a critical error. To make the transfer look legitimate to his own auditors, he had listed the original source of funds on Schedule B to justify the balance. There it was in black and white. Source: Consulting Revenue Omega Partners. He wasn't asking me to sign a waiver. He was asking me to sign a confession. He was documenting that the money in my name came directly from the shell company he used for kickbacks. If I signed this, I wasn't just giving him permission to move the money. I was creating a physical chain of custody linking him to embezzlement. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his eyes narrowing. "No problem," I said. "Just admiring your record keeping." I signed my name with a flourish. I pushed the document back to him. He snatched it up, a triumphant smirk twisting his lips. He thought he had just secured his retirement fund. He didn't realize he had just handed me the murder weapon. Good, he said, tucking the evidence into his jacket pocket. Now finish your vegetables. You can't afford to waste food anymore. I took a bite of the dry chicken. Tasted like victory. The building that housed Vance and Associates was a glass monolith that seemed to slice the sky open. It was the antithesis of my father's cramped, mahogany-paneled world. This was where the sharks swam. And Professor Vance was the biggest shark of them all. He was my father's direct corporate rival, the man tasked with auditing the very merger my father's company was trying to close. I walked into the lobby wearing the only suit I owned, a charcoal gray ensemble I'd bought for a mock trial in sophomore year. I didn't have an appointment. I didn't have a resume. I had a single manila folder and the kind of desperation that sharpens your focus to a razor's edge. The receptionist tried to stop me. Professor Vance is in meetings all day. You can leave your card. I don't have a card, I said, placing the folder on the marble desk. But tell him this file contains the reason his audit of Omega Partners is about to fail. 3 minutes later, I was sitting in a corner office that smelled of espresso and power. Professor Vance stood by the window, flipping through the pages I had printed from my father's server. He stopped on page 4. His eyebrows rose. This is a discrepancy in the vendor payout schedule, he said, not looking up. A rounding error. It's not a rounding error, I said. It's a pattern. Look at the timestamps. Every transaction ends in 03. That's not a vendor code. That's a routing number for a shell account. He looked up then. He looked at me the way a jeweler looks at a rough diamond, assessing the cut, the clarity, the potential value. Who are you? I'm the person who knows where the rest of the zeros are, I replied. And I'm looking for a job. He closed the folder. You start Monday. Junior analyst. Don't make me regret this. He didn't regret it. I spent the next 3 months living in that office. I was the first one in, the last one out. I devoured data. I traced shell companies through 3 different tax havens. I built a map of corruption so detailed it could have hung in a gallery. But the real target was always the UTMA. 2 days before graduation, late at night, I finally had the access I needed. I logged into the secure banking portal using the credentials I'd scraped from my father's server months ago. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The moment of truth. I typed in the account number. I hit enter. The screen blazed red. Account closed. Panic hit, but I forced myself to think. Digging past the interface into raw logs, I found it. A pending transfer scheduled for tomorrow. He hadn't stolen the money yet. It was sitting in escrow, still legally tied to my UTMA. And at midnight on my 21st birthday, it became mine. At 12 a.m., I filed a reclamation claim and redirected $450,000 into a private trust. Game over. The next morning, I walked across the graduation stage as valedictorian, locking eyes with the man who once called me dead capital. While the crowd applauded, he understood I wasn't just his daughter anymore. I was the auditor coming for him. Outside, he grabbed my arm and demanded the scholarship money, claiming I owed him for raising me. I showed him the emptied UTMA account, the same one he'd used as a secret slush fund. The custodianship expired at midnight. Legally, every cent was mine. If he challenged me, he'd have to explain those kickbacks to the IRS. Sirens wailed in the distance. His empire was collapsing in real time. He thought he was